All right, well, welcome back. Yeah, we've looked at the structure and hopefully you've memorized that structure. And again, if you recall, we said that that structure is actually going to serve you really well because it's giving you a series of file folders, and you can think of the whole thing as a file cabinet in which when you read the Old Testament, you can actually have a place to stick these stories and that the narrative story itself will begin to make more sense. And the more you read, the more you'll recognize how the things are connected and how they actually fit into this amazing story that God has given us in the Old Testament. So I want us to begin by looking at the overview of the Old Testament. But what we're doing in this sense is we're going to look at it from the perspective of the story. And so I love this picture, and there's part of this picture I don't like, but I'll share first the part that I really do like, is when you're thinking of the Old Testament and you're thinking about, and you read it, you'll see that very consistently God goes back to one very significant happening, and that's the story of the Red Sea crossing, because it's the time that God rescued the people. And so I love this picture because if you look at the picture, it's this violent, just overwhelming picture of God's power at work to rescue his people and to have 2 million people cross on dry land. And so you can imagine that just the sounds and the sea raging around you as you're walking through these walls of water with your family, and just how terrifying that would have been. But at the same time, you're just like you're just struck or overwhelmed by the significance of what's happening. Is that you're walking on dry land and that this thing that's happening has never happened before. And so this is where God is rescuing his people. And so this is what commonly in the Old Testament stories they go back to talk about the nature of God and who he is and how he works. And then we see a very similar kind of rescue story when we get to the New Testament, right? When Christ comes, he rescues us from sin. And in the Old Testament, God is rescuing them from Egypt, which is personified as sin. And so it's just a beautiful story. And so hopefully this picture will help you as you're trying to grasp what this story is all about. So let's go ahead and begin by reviewing at the structure. And by now you should definitely have this memorized because this becomes your file folders for the story that we're going to go through. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually label each of those file folders so you have a clear picture of what each of them represents, which will then help you to put the story together. Now, with that, what I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to take a few minutes to actually label each one of these images and try to think through, okay, if this is the story of the Old Testament, try to guess what you think each of these images represents. When you finish that, what you can do now is you can pause the video, and when you finish that, just push play again, and then I'm going to walk you through the labels that I've come up with. So go ahead and pause it now, and I'll see you in a minute. All right, well, welcome back. And now what we're going to do is we're actually just going to walk our way through the story. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail, but I'm going to go through enough just to give you a sense of how the narrative itself works out. And we'll go image by image, and we'll work our way through all the images. So the first image says creation. Creation very clearly is that God creates. He creates the man and the woman. He creates the world. He creates all that's in it. And it's in Genesis 1 and 2. It's perfect but incomplete. Then what happens is this beautiful creation that God has. The serpent or Satan comes in. He tempts the woman. She then is deceived. She takes from the fruit of the tree from the middle of the garden that she wasn't supposed to take from. She gives to her husband. He eats, and the fall takes place. The red arrow represents the fall, that all mankind is forever changed, that all creation is forever changed. And so now what's going to happen is God's going to put this rescue plan into place, and it starts with the primeval. And the primeval really is just helping us to understand that the world is going to get worse before it's going to get better. And so we see that the wage for God told Adam, if you take from this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the day you take of it, you shall surely die. And that death was first a spiritual death, separation from God. And then it was going to be a physical death. And the primeval period begins to just show us how destructive sin was. And so we have both the worldwide flood, and then we have the Tower of Babel. The worldwide flood is where God preserves and rescues as an act of grace Noah and his family, and is going to repopulate the earth through them. But he destroys the rest of the world because of their progressive wickedness. And then we get to the Tower of Babel, and again, man was supposed to represent God in this world and his interests. Man chooses to represent his own, and so God scrambles the languages so that man cannot continue to do more and more evil because it's more and more difficult for them to communicate with each other, which then slows down the progression of evil. The primeval period takes us from Genesis 4 through Genesis 11. And then God is going to begin to really institute the rescue plan. He takes a man by the name of Abram out of a pagan nation. He brings him to the land of Israel, and he tells them that he's going to make him a great nation. For him to be a great nation, he's going to need three things. He's going to need people, he's going to need law, and he's going to need land. You need those three elements to be present to have a great nation. And so Abraham has a wife by the name of Sarai. It's Abram and Sarai, and it's going to change to Abraham and Sarah. And what's going to happen in that is they are doubting God, and so they are going to try to solve the problem of not having progeny because she's having problems getting pregnant. And they try to take the matters into their own hands. They make matters worse. They have Ishmael, but he's not the child of promise. Finally, they get the promised child, which is Isaac. And then you have this period called the patriarchs. And so we have Abraham and Isaac, and then Isaac has at least two sons, one of which is Jacob, which is significant for us. And then Jacob has 12 sons, one of which is going to be Joseph. So when you think of the story of the patriarchs, you can think of those four, and I'd actually throw in a fifth, which would be, so you have Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob. And within this Jacob, I would throw in Judah, and we'll see why later, and then also Joseph. And then what happens is God is growing, he's starting to grow his people. So by the time you finish Genesis, you have 70 people, you get into Exodus chapter 1, and you see that their population grows from 70 to over 2 million people. And so now what happens is the story of the Exodus is, how do you get these people out of the land of Egypt, right? So that's the Exodus part. They're going to exit the land of Egypt. And so it's getting the people out of Egypt and to give them the land that God had promised Abraham when he made a covenant to make him a great nation. And so what happens is, on their way, God gives them the law. That's the book of Leviticus. And then as they're ready to go into the land, they send out spies, and the spies come back, and 10 have a really lousy report, even though it's exactly like God said, that it's this country, it's this land full of abundance. And only two, which are Joshua and oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm drawing a blank here, and Caleb, come back with a good report. And in that good report, they urge the people, you need to take the land. But the 10 spies are saying, no, the land is what God promised, but to these giants. And the problem is that the 10 spies were looking at the size of the giants and not the size of their God. But Caleb and Joshua looked at the size of their God, and that's why they urged the people to go through. But during that, they say no, and as a result, they don't get to go into the land. And now they're in this period of bondage, but that bondage was with Egypt, and now they're going to have to wander for 30 or for 40 years because of their sin of unbelief. And during that 40 years, that first generation will completely die, except for two individuals, Caleb and Joshua. Then you get to the book of Deuteronomy, and the book of Deuteronomy is really the second giving of the law. It's to the second generation, which watched all their parents die, and God's now saying, okay, you have an opportunity to go in and take the land I promised your parents. Because of their unbelief, they didn't get to go in, but you now have that chance. The book of Deuteronomy is the second giving of the law. And then as you work your way through that, it's structured around three sermons. And now we're ready to fulfill that very last part of becoming a great nation, right? We have the people, that was the book of Exodus. We have the law, that was the book of Leviticus. And now we just need the land. And that was going to be fulfilled in Numbers, but because of their unbelief, it's now going to be fulfilled in Joshua. And then the other significant thing happens right before they're going to go into the land is that there's a shift in leadership. And that's because Moses, as great of a man as he was, leadership is greater responsibility. He struck the rock. He acted in a lack of faith toward God. And God said, I'll let you see the land, but you don't get to lead it in. But Joshua will lead it in. And that takes us from the period of the patriarchs and bondage in Israel and wandering throughout the desert, to the period of Joshua, which you can think of in two ways. One is they had to conquer the land, conquest, and then they had to divide the land among the 12 tribes. And so within that, after Joshua goes in and they secure the land and the tribes are distributed and they divide the land, then you get this period of the judges, which is about a 400 plus time period. And it's just a really wicked time. And that's why you have this spiraling down. And the best way I can think about it, and the way it's very easy to remember, is every time you flush your toilet, that's the period of judges. It was just a terrible period of time. And there's 7 cycles of judgment that happen. We're not going to go through all the details here, but we'll in a future video. But just know that the nation of Israel was supposed to represent God and be a beacon to the world as to who God was and to bring rescue to the world. And instead, they have these 7 cycles of sin that just get worse and worse and worse until you get to the last cycle where they almost destroy an entire tribe of people because of the wickedness of that tribe. And so rather than representing God, they chose to represent themselves. Now, buried within that is the diamond, and that's the book of Ruth. Ruth is a really amazing book when you understand its context. It takes place during this period of the Judges. Period of the Judges is just a very dark, grim time for the nation because they chose not to live by faith. They chose not to represent God. But Ruth, interestingly enough, she's a Moabite woman, and she does exactly what the nation of Israel should have done but didn't do. And so I think God provides her as a way to shame the nation. One is she was a woman in a patriarchal society, and she is going to be the beacon of light of faith. Second is she is from a cursed people. The Moabite people didn't allow the nation of Israel to pass through their land, and so God cursed them and said, excuse me, for 10 generations, you're going to be cursed. But God lifts the curse for her. She then becomes a beacon to shame the nation, to say, this is how you should have lived, but you chose not to live. Then towards the end of the book of Judges, the people are complaining, and what they really want is they want a king. They want to be like all the other nations, which is totally antithetical to what God wanted. God says, you're not supposed to be like the other nations. You're supposed to be a beacon so the other nations see me and they'll repent from their idolatrous ways and they will follow me and they will be able to enjoy life the way I created it. And so when they call for a king, they get 3 kings. And so I'm sure you know the names of those kings, but you have Saul, and then you have David, and then you have Solomon. Saul is the very first king. He is the people's choice. He's tall, he's handsome, he's everything that the people wanted in a king. And he starts out good, but he ends really poorly. And so the throne moves from Saul then to David. Again, David starts out really good, and this is God's choice as David, right? And so he starts out really good, but he too ends up really badly. We know the story of Bathsheba, and then he murders her husband Uriah. He has a child because of his adulterous affair with her, and his life is never the same. But what's really interesting, right, is God says, well, you're a man after my own heart. And the reason why is that David repented, Saul did not. So then we go from Saul to David, and then we move finally to David's son, which is Solomon. And Solomon, again, just like his father and Saul, start out well, but he ends up poorly. And the reason why he ends up poorly is because he has this overwhelming desire for women from foreign countries. And as a result, his divided heart, because of these just so many women, then they're false gods that he goes after their gods. And so his divided heart results in a split or a divided nation. And then you have 10 tribes that go to the north, 2 that go to the south. And so when you look at the divided kingdom, the northern kingdom is called Israel. And if you notice that rectangle ends far earlier than the southern kingdom does. And the reason for that is in the northern kingdom, you have zero good kings. And as a result, God uses the nation of Assyria. And if you look at the rectangle that's got Assyria, Babylon, Persia, those are the nations that God uses to judge his own people. You can think of it as a disciplining rod because of their evil. And so then the northern kingdom, with having no good kings and choosing not to follow God, God raises up Assyria. Assyria takes them into captivity, but they just disappear. Many people think that when you get to the New Testament, you look at the Samaritans, that's where the people of the northern kingdom settled. But for our purposes, just know that because they had no good kings, they are sent into exile early. Then with the southern kingdom, you can see that that rectangle extends further. And the reason for that, and again, you have two nations here, two of the 12 tribes, is because they had some good kings. And because they had some good king, God gave them the ability to stay in the land longer. But eventually you can see that the nation of Babylon is going to take them into captivity. And then that brings us to the period of the captivity, which is this red dotted rounded rectangle. And that's a 70-year period. And so that's when you think about that, you can think about the story of Daniel. And he said, he's in his room and in Daniel 6, and he opens the windows and he's looking towards Jerusalem, which is laying in ruins because the Babylonians just destroyed it, destroyed the temple. And he's praying that God would restore Jerusalem, that he would restore the temple. But that's during the period of the captivity. But the captivity ends because that was a very clear time of God's judgment. And it gives way to the period of restoration. And the period of restoration is a picture of God's grace, where he's giving the nation a second chance to fulfill their original role, which was to represent him before the world, to be a beacon, a shining light, to draw all people to himself. And so under Zerubbabel, the people come back. They're going to begin to rebuild the temple. This is now what's called the Second Temple period. And so they physically, under Zerubbabel, complete the temple. Then a second wave comes in. This is under Ezra, and Ezra sees the conditions, and he wants to see not only is the physical temple restored, but the spiritual meaning behind it is restored in the people. And so he's praying for there to be a revival in the hearts of the people, and that's under Ezra. Then Nehemiah is going to build this protective wall around the Jerusalem, with the city of Jerusalem, so that it can function as a city, as a beacon on a hill to draw the people to God. But unfortunately, the story doesn't end well, because the nation itself rejects God, rejects the position that God had given, chooses not to live by faith. And as a result, we see that it just ends. And under Persian rule, that is where the story of the Old Testament ends. And it's a really sad story. It ends in the book of Malachi, where you get Malachi giving his prophecy, and it ends with a curse. And so then the question is, well, what's going to happen? God had this rescue plan put in place. It started with Abraham, and he had this series of covenants. But what is God going to do? Is he going to rescue the world, or is it just going to end this way? Well, that's what the Old Testament is designed to do, is to leave us with that question. God, do you still care? Will you still rescue humanity from their sin? And so that's the story of the Old Testament. And hopefully, I realize that it's a very quick overview, but if you can grasp that, then you have the file folders labeled. And as you're reading it, you have places to put the stories that you read. And if you read this with this out in front of you when you're reading, and you start labeling where those different books fall, you're going to just see that your reading is going to be much more rich. So hopefully this has been helpful to you, and it'll get you going. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the significance of this whole overview of the Old Testament. So thank you.